fiscal budget cycle that we're working on. We want to minimize budget impacts to taxpayers, consider reducing or postponing wanted projects that are not yet in progress. We want to fund all needed and necessary expenses to maintain our town and our programs. We want to maintain fiscal responsibility and spend conservatively, maintain a stable level of debt, pursue creative financing, grants, and community donations for projects, and prioritize investment in recreational assets and public facilities. So those are some of the goals that came from the Select Board, Budget Committee, and other boards and committees. Revenue highlights. I'm going to start talking about the details of this budget. We'll go through revenue, and then we'll go through expense. We'll also talk about the capital reserves a little bit in the middle there, and then we'll talk about some highlights at the end of the presentation. Every year we do see an increase, at least recently, in the tax base. We have budgeted for a 0.5% increase. We're actually looking to exceed that. Will probably be at least 1%, if not maybe 1.25 or 1.5. That's good news, because that means that the numbers that we budgeted are already heading down. So the impact on individual taxpayers is going to be less, because we do have more revenue coming in from people doing work on their homes, building new construction, things like that. So that's starting off with some very good news. COVID-19 impacts were considered, but they were less than they were in years past. Still evident, though. Revenue sharing is one of those numbers. The state had been fairly conservative, and we too were conservative in our estimates. I think at this point in the budget, the state is feeling more optimistic about those numbers, but when we locked our budget in, we weren't really feeling that confident, and I don't believe they were either. So we do have lower than what normally we would expect, but still higher than last year. A bit of a nuance there, but investment income is up. We're budgeting $30,000 because we will be investing probably at least $1 million, maybe a little bit more, depending on what our advice is from financial institutions, in CDs and CDARs, which are different investment tools that can give us returns of 3 to sometimes 5%, and that's going to be something that we can utilize to help lower taxes. Laddered investing, basically, and I think I said up to $1 million, but our audit is showing that we have a healthy surplus, so that might be improved upon. And then motor vehicle revenues are down by $50,000. That's a modest number. We're talking about well over $500,000 every year over the past several years, so it's a big revenue stream. But again, we're being conservative because we don't want to overestimate revenues that would leave us short if we had an issue. Okay, so the use of designated funds and undesignated funds count towards revenue. Use of designated funds is up $275,000. Undesignated funds are up $50,000. And we'll talk about more on that later, but the big chunk of that is the use of $200,000 and really $275,000 for the fire truck. So that is where a majority of that comes from. Recreational revenues are up in almost every program. We have increased participation. Our rec department has actually brought in and really helped to expand some of the offerings for our kids, but also other kids in the district. So we're seeing the benefit of that. We're also seeing a bit of the burden of having additional administrative responsibilities related to managing recreational resources and programming, but the revenue is starting to come in to offset that. We have bond proceeds of around $348,000. That depends on what the final borrowing is and the final cost of the truck, but that's our estimate for that. And that's down from a larger number because we are using reserves to lessen the impact of what we're having to borrow at a higher rate. We'll be using money that was borrowed at a lower rate earlier. Federal grant revenue of $30,000 for the proposed sidewalk project. There is a match 80-20 on that project. Total transfer station revenue is up over $32,000. First park revenue, once again, looking to be equal or exceeding expenses. So that's a positive term for that organization, which we've been a member of for over 25 years now. So this table summarizes the the department level revenues, you'll see that we have a big increase in administration. A lot of that is from use of reserves, from the bond proceeds that we have coming in, and actually that's not right. Bond proceeds are later in Department 65 for capital improvements, and also tax revenue. And again, we try to separate out school, county, and municipal budgets, but we have to show in our accounting everything. So when we have revenue coming in of $700,000 plus, a lot of that is to offset the $400,000 increase in the school budget. So that's one reason why that number is so large. Moving on down the list, most things are fairly static, but little changes here and there, percentage-wise or dollar-wise. Again, Department 65, $380,000. That's almost exclusively revenue from the bond proceeds, and that's the revenue as it shows on the graph or on the table. This is the graph showing that. Again, you see those two spikes, one for administration, one for Department 65, which is capital. And the others show in this slide to be fairly small relative to the others. This shows the administration-specific breakdown. And you can see that the use of carry forwards is up sizably, $275,000, and then the $365,000 increase in taxes. And that increase in taxes, again, is less than what we're seeing for the increase in the school budget. I'm not saying it's a one-to-one. I'm just saying that we have worked hard to try to minimize the impact that we're seeing, but we can't minimize it all, especially when the town, we are a pass-through for the school. They've already applied all of the discounts, credits, and revenue they're getting from the state and federal sources. So any increase that we see is more or less a direct pass-through. But in this case, we've actually been able to reduce that impact from the school by a little bit by using other sources. So, which we try not to do too much because that's a kind of a false representation. So I'll stop right there and ask if there are any questions on revenue from the board members or from the public or Zoom.
So if someone asks a question on Zoom, can we read it out loud?
I definitely will. I definitely will.
So it looks like there's nobody in person. Dennis, do you want to?
What's that?
Oh, so I'm taking questions. If
there are no questions on Zoom at this point.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
Thank you.
Sure. Great. Well, and I am going through this fast because this is like the 8th time, but certainly stop me if you have a question. I'm not trying to roll through too hot. So fund highlights. This is one of the big pieces of the budget that we use to help smooth things out. If we have a big project coming up, we often use fund balances to minimize those impacts. So they contribute to the stability of our taxes and our tax rate, and oftentimes relate to capital expenditures. Fund balances are conservative, but they're based on audit and actual reconciliation of data. Again, we have increases in 2 departments, designated and undesignated funds. To be clear, designated funds are things like money that we've set aside for roads or a specific building improvement, or it might be for, well, anyway, a capital item that's known. And the undesignated fund usage is really there as a general catch-all. And we try to minimize how much of that we use and keep a certain amount in reserve so that if we have an issue come up, we have funds available, and we have a policy for 2/12. So we, including the school budget, will maintain 2/12 of expenditures that are anticipated for the year. And that gives us that cushion in case something comes up. And again, we're increasing that a little bit, but that 50,000 really is there to just to soften a little bit that edge coming from the school budget, and a little bit from the county too. The county budget went up by, I think, about 1%, but still a little bit of an impact there. So we expect to be about 20% above the minimum. And we don't really talk too much about whether that's too much or too little. If we're at bare bottom, that means that we don't really have any capacity to go below the threshold without having to talk about where that leaves us as far as financial risk. Being above the threshold is the best place to be. If we were 50% above the threshold, I'd say, wait a minute, we might want to talk about putting more money back in to reduce the tax burden. But we're not there this year. And a 20% increase or surplus above the bare minimum seems to be a reasonable place. But also, we mentioned that joint meeting between the Budget Committee and Select Board. I'm hoping that that reserve can be one of the things that we talk about. Is that 2/12 policy right? Does it set the right amount of money for buffering? And where should we be? Having a bare minimum is fine, but shouldn't we have a range so that we can establish a smart way to manage that fund without allowing too much to stay in there? So just kind of a side note about that upcoming meeting. This chart here shows our fund balances. And I will say that through 2021, these are actuals. 2022 is the current audit year. We just received the final audit, and I haven't updated those numbers, but we are seeing that we anticipate reserve balances to increase a little bit and then decrease in fiscal year 24, which is the one we're budgeting for, as we draw down some of those balances for larger projects. So still, we're doing better in most areas than we have in years past, which is okay because we have increasing expenses, we have inflation. So you would want to see generally an upward trend in these balances, but we also don't want to, again, have too much in reserve. So this is just a graphic representation to give you an idea. Any questions on fund balances or what those tools do for us or what we are currently budgeting for expenditures out of those? Yeah, Carol.
Eric, so I got this right. Somebody asked and I couldn't answer it. So designated funds, now some of them are from the committees, like overages of the committees rolled into designated funds.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And so now we're using 200 something to reduce the tax burden. So when one of these committees then says, I have a project I want to use that fund that was set aside for whatever, cemeteries or whatever, is that money there then if we're using that to counterbalance? Like what happens then?
That's a good question. And it's actually a good point, is that yes and no. So when we worked on the budget, we talked with the different boards and committees about their fund balances. We talked with them about the fact that going forward, things won't just automatically roll forward. If they don't spend the money, it will go into the undesignated fund and basically go back to be able to be used to offset the tax impact because of really a recommendation from our auditors and something that was adopted by the select board that said, you know, it's not transparent to just have money automatically roll into a fund at the end of the year. We want to make sure that people are actually actively planning for use of funds and also planning to put money into reserve for future projects. So an example I'll give you is with the fire department. We are using $75,000 out of the fire department reserve because we discussed that with them and they recognized that they had over 120,000, maybe 125 in their reserve. They felt that 50 was a reasonable safety net for fire department equipment and operations. And so we said, well, you know, we've been putting aside this and it's been rolling forward for a while. And so this is a good time to use it so that we can soften the impact of that purchase. So that's really how it's intended to work. So I'd say that in that case, no, that money won't be there, but it will have been expended because of an intentional, thoughtful process. The other $200,000 was money that we had looked at for the sprinkler system that we then reallocated through. It's too close now. I talk with my hand. There's a balance here someplace. But that was allocated to help soften, again, the impact of the fire truck. So the idea isn't that we're not pilfering, we're not sneaking in and grabbing money. We're having discussions with these boards and committees about what's in their account, how much they think they need, what do they want to spend it for, and anything that's in there now, except for what's been already designated through this budget process, will stay there. Going forward, though, things won't just automatically accrue. They'll have to give us a reason for putting money in there. And my hope is, an expectation, that if someone thinks that the rec board, for example, they want to replace all of their soccer gear, although that's probably not a good example, that's more operating, but they want to build a new, I don't want to say basketball court because that's probably just going to start something, but if they wanted to do that, they could say, well, I want to put $20,000 a year over the next 5 years into reserve, and then we can use it for that. That's one example, right? But a better one is really the roads. We put money every year, $200,000 to $300,000 in reserve, and we don't spend all that every year, but some years we spend $100,000 on paving, some years we spend $450,000 or $500,000 on paving. And we have a schedule of expenditures that helps us manage that through the capital plan. So I guess it's a long answer to a question, but I think it was a very good question, and I hope it covers what was being asked, yeah.
So I guess if the fire station had that much in, I'm not sure now if that was designated or undesignated, but they need an expensive fire truck, why do they have anything in reserve when they need a big piece of equipment? Why is that, all of that set aside for the use in that department, not used towards one of these big expenses that they say they need?
Well, it is. They're using 75,000. They're using.
Well, why aren't they using all of it?
Oh, because if they use all of it, then if we have an engine blow in a fire truck, we don't really have a department-specific reserve that we could use. We would have to likely either use the entirety of the select board contingency or have a special town meeting to raise funds from the undesignated funds. So these are basically, they serve two purposes. Their savings account, it's almost like a household. You got money in the bank in case something happens, but you also use it when you decide to build a new roof, but you might also use it when your roof starts leaking around the chimney and you don't know why, and it costs $10,000 to get someone in there to fix it. That kind of an analogy, yeah.
But I guess that's where I have a huge question on the whole budget system is, I thought, in very simple terms, the town has a project. What is this project? What is the extent of the project? What it's going to cost? And then it comes to us and say, do we want that project? Instead of, we're going to reserve and reserve and reserve, and someday we're going to use that for something. Maybe that's an oversimplification of how I thought.
I think it is a little, just because the capital plan that we have sets out a vast majority of our capital expenditures. And so really the way you described it, the first sentence, really is what happens. We plan for things. We know that in 3 years, we're going to have a big glut in road work. So we're putting aside, even though we might not need to spend as much this year or next year because our paving schedule doesn't demand it, we know that it's going to be needed in 3 years, so we put the money aside. And I guess that, yeah, I'll probably stop there. But
isn't part of that approach is to try to smooth the impact on the taxpayer, so you're not seeing up and down, up and down, up and down.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's more static. There's less whiplashing. Because you're going to have to pave the roads.
But I guess that's my big question is, then things don't come to a discussion or a vote. They're decided.
They do, though. I mean, because the money is being allocated. So again, with the new accounting system that we have, that increases transparency. In order for money to go into those reserves, it has to be asked for and go through the whole budget process of working through the budget committee, working through the select board, and getting voter approval. And so that all does happen and then is approved at town meeting.
The capital plan is what we use for all of that discussion, Carol, that you're asking for. And so that's why every year we talk about that for 2 to 3 hours and make a plan of, do we still think this is the right direction? Is this still the year that we need this? Oh, no, we think we can put that off 5 more years. So we changed the date. We changed how often we're funding it and with how much money. I wanted to make another comment that one of the reasons we're doing this change in the accounting process on recommendation of the auditors is so let's say I'm on committee X and we budget $5,400 for our expenses this year and we only spend $4,400. Well, then I didn't budget very well because I have $1,000 left over. So in the past, that $1,000 would just roll into my reserve account. But now I believe what we're going to do is that $1,000 is going to go back into the pot, so to speak, and the voters are going to get to decide, does that committee get more money again next year? So we don't want people to be over budgeting by departments or town manager or committees. We want them to try and budget as close as they can to what they're going to spend. And if they have overages, then that goes back into the general fund and the voters get to decide through the whole budget process and town meeting vote again, how much that committee gets. And that's been part of, I think, what you've been talking about with the transparency piece. In the past, that money has just accumulated staying with those expenses. So committee X would just get $1,000 more. And so this will be much more fair to everyone.
Yeah. Another perspective. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Yes.
Another perspective is that in governmental accounting, there are two sides to every authorization in the warrant. On one side, you're authorizing the expenditure of the funds, say on the fire truck. And then you also have to have another side to that where you're authorizing the raising or transferring of funds to cover those expenses. So it does get a little bit cumbersome. I think another thing to keep in mind, fund balance does not mean the balance in the checking account. It's the difference between our assets, all the things that we own, and our liabilities, all the funds that we owe. So there may be times by coincidence when the amount of cash in the bank is close to the fund balance, but it's not always going to be that close.
I guess it's just hard when everything's so lumped together in 200,000, 300,000. When you say decide if that committee gets more money or not, it's all together. You can't say, I like that one, but I don't know about that one. So it's just either like all or nothing, which it is what it is.
But they're separate questions in the warrant, so.
But they're a list like this long of everything
Right, but
in
the
that
town
bundle.
could turn down, the voters could say no to a fire truck.
Right, but the big list is everything from little committees to the transfer station. Well, I'm just saying it's hard to,
Well, we have 44 articles, I think, so they're pretty broken out. Not every, I mean, we don't want to have 90 different articles. We used to have 70-something, people really complained. And so we consolidated some that seemed to make sense and in an accounting sense, and upon advice of the auditors, these things have a natural fit together. And so we'll put those together. And then we discuss those every year between the select board and the budget committee, what seems to fit. And we try to alter things as it makes sense. And that's what we're really going to discuss at that next budget joint meeting with the select board and the auditors, is especially focusing on capital. Should capital be broken out in a different way? And let's do it meaningfully in what makes sense in a legal sense for how it works in the financial world, not just how we might think it would look nice, because we're not all experts in accounting for governments.
but I think the vote on spending is like the critical questions that people should have say in. Maybe less so some of the other stuff, but the spending part is where we kind of need input, because that's their dollars, tax dollars, we're taking from them and doing something with, and that's, so that's.
Well,
just
that's
my
why we
thought.
had 16 meetings. Is that what you said, Eric, at the beginning?
It's all bundled together, and we're just keep talking about the same questions with the same numbers. Anyway, we can move on.
Thank you. Eric, go ahead.
Sure, well, it was a good discussion. Thanks for spreading some of that out, especially the deeper discussion around capital. So I'm going to share my screen again here. I did, sorry, it took me a while to realize that everybody was looking at the same slide instead of the people talking. So once I realized that, I took my screen share off, but I'll go back to it so we can continue on with the presentation here. I want to go.
He's going back to screen sharing, just show the slideshow.
Oh, come on.
Oh, yeah.
All right, here we go. I think that's, okay, all right. Okay, so we'll start with some highlights. And a lot of these things will be repeating the statements that we'll make about why things are costing more or why things are different. But with administration, one of the biggest changes is labor and insurance costs are up about $30,000. We did work with a new labor contract for the union employees, just approved a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and other employees, non-union employees, are also getting raises that keep pace with inflation in the state of Maine. So that's a big part of the cost increases in that department. Office equipment appears to be up almost $26,000, but that's actually due to a $24,000 transfer in from contract services. We moved basically our software licensure from one area to the next, so it kind of changed a little bit of how things look. Assessing is down and code enforcement is up budgetarily, and that's more or less offsetting. Grant writing and planning services are up by $3,000, and that is less than what we had originally talked about because of feedback from Public and Carol. So we are trying to make some adjustments. Legal fees are down by $25,000 due to the establishment of our legal fund reserve. However, there is always an ongoing threat of litigation, and we can't do anything. If someone chooses to sue the town for any reason, we have an obligation to defend, whether they have a good reason or not. Maintenance, the department is up a net of $16,000, again, in large part due to labor and materials costs. Community services, we see a small increase in the animal control officer budget. Part of that's for the stipend, part of that is, I think, from the animal shelter. Meeting, recording, and broadcasting expenses are up about $2,500. We've found that the technology we have and the people that we have running it are invaluable over the past few years, so we're making sure that we have the right stipends in place, and we've also budgeted. Bill's been having trouble with the internet. We budgeted for a higher tier cable service. Spectrum provides us with the bare minimum, I think out of spite more than anything, because we don't even get a quarter of what a household gets in town at the base level. So we are having to pay for service when we should be getting it for free as part of our cable franchise, but we're renegotiating that, so I'm really excited to maybe get that fixed. But in any event, we're increasing some costs there. Library is up almost $5,000, mostly due to labor. We have a decrease in streetlights, and that's due to the new fixtures realizing cost savings. We switched to LED and took over ownership of those, and that's been saving us a few $1,000s a year at least, and more if I look back to 2021 or so. Recreation, parks, and activities. Expenses are down or flat for all divisions, so that's good news. Swim lessons are not able to be offered this year, and that's an unfortunate cost savings. I really do want to bring that back next year, but we need help with staffing. We need the YMCA perhaps to maybe be able to find staff, but we're having trouble finding people to work at the beach, so it's a universal issue. Moving on to protection, ambulance budget is up a modest $2,670. We've had some pretty sizable increases over the past couple of years. Dispatching costs are up about $6,500. This is a pretty big jump, but that's in part because Somerset County no longer is handling our E911, and we have to get a new contract with Androscoggin County to manage that particular service for us. And it costs more, and of course everything's up a little bit. Cemetery budget is flat. Roads and drainage, it's essentially flat on summer road maintenance. I'm having a little bit of regret that we didn't increase that some because we had two storms this year that have given probably at least $60,000 in damages, and we're still dealing with the after effects of those. These are, storms that should be once in 50 years, and we had 2 in 1 year. So we'll be talking next budget cycle about putting a little bit more money in that fund, into that budget line, excuse me. And then a $48,000 increase in winter road maintenance, and that's covering cost increases, again, labor and materials. Salt costs more, sand costs more, and our contract has a cost of a CPI, Consumer Price Index escalator, so that as the cost of fuel and other commodities increases, so does our contract. Fortunately, fuel has taken a positive direction, and we're back to not reasonable, but slightly better levels when it comes to that, which is a big part of the cost of running equipment on the roads. Capital improvements, $623,057 estimated for the purchase of the fire truck. And again, we've talked about it, the $275,000 that's coming in revenue from use of reserves, and then the bond, which accounts for that total. 10,000 decrease in savings for Guile Hall, 10,000 decrease in library building reserve, $50,000 flat budget for open space fund, $392,000 for paving and infrastructure. And to break that down a little bit, we've got $325,000 for the paving reserve. We will be spending a portion of that in the fiscal year, but really I think that we'll be looking to do more ditching and culvert work, and as a capital item out of some of that money, considering again the damage that we had from these last storms. And then we have $67,500 for the church road sidewalk with an 80% match from the federal government for the cost of the design and planning work that we're in now. Again, that project will be moving forward if we find the need to a town meeting vote next June, where we will be looking at a final proposal and a final cost estimate. Ongoing lease payments and reserve of the transfer station. So that's just a note that says that yes, we are putting money aside for lease payments and for the transfer station, which has ongoing needs. Moving to that department, 48,000 increase for expenses there, primarily labor and materials costs. Our contracts have gone up probably 10%, maybe 15% in the last 2 years. And Catherine, I'll let you go. Yeah.
That's the overall cost for the entire transfer station, and only about half of that is accountable for Reed Field because we share that expense from Fayette and Wayne, correct?
That is correct. And I'm glad you brought that point up, because that's another change that will be happening with our auditing. We will no longer be including the full cost of services like the transfer station or the code office that we share with Wayne. Anything that's interlocal like that, the revenues and expenses will be running through a basically an enterprise type account, so that we won't show all the full expense for the whole operation. We'll just be showing Reed Field's share. And that should make it easier for us to see what's actually affecting taxpayers in town. So that'll be an improvement for the overall visibility of what Reed Field is actually obligated to take care of, and the revenue side as well. So education is up 9.2%, and I guess I apologize, I've been saying 400,000, it's actually 342,000 was the increase. It was 400, we had estimated 10%, but then they came in at 9.2. So that's an improvement, and they've done, I think, very good work to try to minimize the impacts that they've seen. And I'll just stop 1 minute and say, there's a kind of a trajectory of school funding and school expenditures, and really where they are now is about where they would have been if COVID hadn't happened. So we had a dip for 2 years plus where school spending went down, and we know that that's not a real thing. That's a number that just logically would not be going down, and so now they're back up. It's a big bite, but now they're about on track as far as where they would have been prior to COVID. So,
but just to reiterate, the education budget is handed to the town by the school board. It's nothing any of us
Not as individuals, yeah,
As
don't
a-
have any control over it.
Right.
And that's a one vote item for $3.5 million, right?
For the town of Reedfield, yeah.
Right,
And
so,
what percentage of our total budget is that?
That'd be over 50%, yeah, probably 55 maybe, of the total budget. When you talk tax impacts, it's different, but the total budget, it's over 55%, yeah.
I thought it was 70%.
Well, so there's a difference between the budget and then the tax impacts. So the budget, we have a lot of expenditures that we can offset through other sources. With the school budget piece, that doesn't exist because they've already, again, put in all the revenues they're going to get from federal government and everything else. And so what actually shows up in the tax bill is a higher percentage than what it actually shows up in the budget. So unclassified, or debt service, excuse me, we have the fire truck bond payment. And this is just for the interest on that bond. It's $7,786 estimated. We'll find out what that is if we purchase the fire truck and if we borrow, but that's our estimate based on a fairly modest interest rate that I think is going to hold true and be good for us. Unclassified revaluation expenses did increase, but $25,000 of that is for the cost of running a 4-year cycle of revaluation work with our assessor. And the revaluation process, we're supposed to do it every 10 to 15 years. We're getting on the outside edge of that, and we're looking at probably, boy, it's probably been closer to 18. I'd have to think back, but in any event, that's what allows us to fairly assess value across all the properties in the town. And so we are obligated to do this, and it's actually a good time. Things are starting to stabilize a little bit after the pandemic impacts, and we've seen a giant escalation in values. And so this is a good opportunity for us to make sure that that we're capturing all the value and everybody's being treated fairly. Excuse me. This summarizes that some of the points that I just made. I won't go through it. The graphs, I think, speak a little bit better. This is the dollar change by department, and you can see capital improvements and education are both up. The capital improvements, that's pretty much the fire truck. And then the school budget is what they handed to us, as Ellen said. So other areas dollar-wise, not small amounts. Some of them are approaching $50,000, but relatively speaking, not so impactful. And so now I'm talking a little bit about the long-term debt. And one of the goals we had with the budget was to minimize debt impacts and to smooth as much as we can. We're looking at a very good debt picture right now. We have a small bump this year because of the interest payment on that fire truck. But after that, we will be seeing a decrease in what we're actually obligated for. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't be borrowing for something else, right? This is just our current obligation for debt. And so the question's been asked, why are we borrowing with the fire truck this year? Why are we doubling up? We're paying for 2 fire truck payments. And the reason is that we've had a request for a piece of equipment from the fire department, and it's going to be 1.5 to 2 years before that's delivered. And so the need is fairly pressing, and we are a little bit hesitant to wait, because when we wait, costs seem to go up astronomically. And interest rates may change, but right now we've got a little bit of a lull. And we're worried that things could get worse. They could get better. But by borrowing now, we're putting ourselves in a good position to get the equipment we need sooner and to take advantage of whatever we can as far as the current economic environment. So before I go on, any questions about the expenses or debt service? I should have paused after the last one.
Go ahead, Dave. Just introduce yourself, you know the plan.
Dave Linton. Going back a little bit to the capital improvements, Catherine, you explained the committee's lookout ahead 4 or 5 years, maybe, like the fire truck, and say we're gonna buy a fire truck, so we start banking that money. What are we banking the 50,000 for the open space for? Do we have a plan, or we're just banking it and banking it? Or is there no plan?
Are you asking me specifically?
Anybody who
Oh,
can
okay.
answer that.
Sure. Eric, do you want to take it?
I mean, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So we had discussions at the budget committee level and from other folks in town saying that they'd like to look at putting money aside for open space preservation, and that could mean a number of different things. So I guess to answer to short circuit, I think I know what you're asking. There is no specific purchase in mind for that project. However, we do have an open space plan that calls for the town to at least consider preserving some of our more valuable assets if the opportunity comes up. Without something in the bank, that's not possible. So the idea is that we have, it looks like probably around 100,000 if this second round is approved, to put towards things like perhaps purchasing easements on that solar farm that we have at the top of the hill there. We could purchase something similar on a different farm if someone said, hey, I want to keep this in agriculture, but I really want to make some money on it. And I could either sell it for development or I could sell you an easement and we'll keep it in farmland. That's just an example. Another option might be to work with Greater Augusta Utility District. One of the things that people talk about commonly is Carlton Pond. And the fact that that's a really important piece of Reed Field. It's a 200-acre lake with no structures on it really. And so as far as environmental and aesthetic and cultural value, that's pretty big. The idea being that if we don't have something to maybe work with, we might not be able to do those things. And I think that going back to that, I'm going to smack this thing. I keep smacking. I'm already smacking.
He's an animated speaker.
The idea that we're going to be having a meeting in June to talk about capital reserves, we can have a better idea of whether that $100,000 is too much, not enough. And we're also working on updating the open space plan. So long answer is there's a lot of things that it could be used for. Short answer is nothing specific.
And one more thing, just to clarify to the public, is where we didn't separate that out on its own article, there are a lot of people that are thinking of voting that whole article down. So, and that's one of those things that where you don't separate it, people are looking at it going, well, that means I don't get the roads paved. What happens in that process if that was to be voted down, just so people know? Does that mean the roads don't get paved?
No.
The fire truck doesn't get bought?
Nope.
Okay, just so people know. So what would be the process if it were voted down?
I believe that's one of the first articles, Eric, in the warrant, is that if something is voted down, we get to operate it, is it for 3 months, so we can spend up to 3/12 of the previous year's budget on that category? Is
Yeah.
that correct?
So yeah, two parts, but I'll let you get to the second part too.
Okay, and then the
Yeah.
second part is that we need to bring that back to the voters to figure out what it is that we do want to do. And so that would happen through a series of meetings with the select board and the budget committee, as long as it's a budget item, and then public meetings, and then having a vote.
We'd have
And
a
we
separate
had this
special
come up a
election.
couple years ago, or 2 years ago, I think, where something came out, and I think the decision.
It was probably 7, Catherine. It was there was the
No, I
dam.
think it was with the planning board. Something didn't go through with the
land use.
ordinance, and so they talked about it and decided that they needed to break it out a certain way, and we had a revote, and people were happy with that question, and it was passed through. And so we try to figure those things out as we go along based on what the voters say.
Thank you.
If I can add to that, it was mentioned before that in June, after the town vote, the select board, the auditors, and the budget committee are going to be meeting to talk about capital. And I'm working on a suggested policy for, first to go to the budget committee as to what capital improvements should be included in a bulk kind of article, and what are the, and what kinds of things should be presented separately, and how do you decide?
That's the key question.
Yeah.
It's to make a meaningful decision,
Right.
not to just say, well, 3 of us really like it this way, so we're going to do it this way. We need to have a reason that we're doing that.
Right.
And as long as we have a reason, and it may be that the reason is that you take every capital item separately, or it may not. But we need to hear from the experts what is typical and then figure out what works best for Reedfield. I think that's the approach we're getting at, and that's a great plan, Mark.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the 3rd year that open space has been on the ballot.
Yeah, so it's the 3rd year. The first year was authorized at 10,000 and was very well supported. And then we had discussion about it and opted to increase it the second year. So that went from 10 to 50.
And it's still passed,
And
right?
and passed last year at 50. And then again, looking at that same level
Sure.
of spending this year.
Excellent.
Or
Thank
level of savings, I guess I should say. Spending's not quite the right word, but.
But that was lumped in with a whole lot of things. Open space was not in a question of its own. It was lumped with fire station and transfer station and roads, and therein lies the problem. It increased by 5 times with no discussion, no vote. It just kind of slipped through.
There was
And
lots
there
of
was.
discussion
Yeah.
and vote.
There was discussion.
I believe I was.
Greg, go
on the
ahead.
select board at that point.
Greg, go ahead.
Well, it's not about this part of the discussion, it's more to help. David asked a good question, I want to add to that.
Please do.
You don't want to keep going with that?
No,
That's really interesting.
only to you.
Okay. Maybe just one, might give you some more information. Greg Durgan, I'm on the Conservation Commission, and that committee is currently, not tonight maybe, but currently rewriting the open space plan. Members Jaron Shaw and Linnea Coons are doing a actual audit of available open space. There's been some information in the Advertiser and other places about how much land is really open, and remember a quote about everybody's got an acre of their own or whatever. But they're actually doing an audit that takes out open space that already belongs to other people, like Kennebec Land Trust, Maine Farmland Trust. So there may be more information coming back to, like Eric was talking about specifics, because we will know more when the open space plan is rewritten and we have that audit done. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Hope that helps, Dave.
Eric, if we get to a point where there's a proposal for any open space thing, a proposal, right, to spend money for some reason, that would become a warrant on the town article, a warrant item on the town ballot. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we would have to, and we might have to have a special town meeting to do it. But yeah, if something came up, then it would be expected that that be on the ballot.
So that's not a select board decision to spend that kind of money.
I mean, I don't believe so. I'd have to look at the law, but I'm pretty sure that purchasing things like that requires voter approval. So there might be a nuance around an easement or something, but I would think that, as has been done in the past wisely, big matters like that are brought to the voters.
Just like when we've saved for a fire truck, that doesn't mean we just buy a fire truck with that money. We bring it back to the voters and say, this is what we'd like to do with this money, and that's why we're doing that with the fire truck this year.
Yeah. I mean, you could try it without doing that, but I wouldn't recommend it. You know?
Absolutely. All right.
All
Eric,
right, so
you want to pick it back up?
Yeah, let me get back to the screen share. I again, want to get back to that. Let's see, where is it?
Oh, it froze in an unfortunate spot.
I know. At least my phone was.
Oh, I thought I saw it for a little bit there. Okay, so let's see here. We'll start from the current slide. Okay, all right. So we've been through debt service. Okay, so municipal budget highlights. Competing budget goals were considered. And that's, we just had some of those, I think, discussed. The idea that we want to keep taxes low, but we also want to plan ahead and try to prepare for things and try to, be meeting multiple goals. A lot of people in town want to see land conserved. A lot of people don't. But those things have been discussed and have been considered. Labor and materials cost and inflation are the main drivers for increased operational expenses and capital expenses to some extent. Community investment in a new fire truck is the primary cause of capital and debt service increases. And we have a net cost increase of about $42,000. Again, this is the municipal side. I'm not talking about the school or the county yet. Just the municipal side, we have a $42,000 increase. And so that translates into about a 4% increase. I expect that that increase might be partially or even fully negated by the fact that we do have a higher increase in the tax base than what we anticipated. So the net impact could be less than this, and I'd say will be with some certainty. Can't say what it is, but we do expect at the worst case, just a 4% increase. And that puts us back at 2020 levels of municipal tax impact, and that's half the rate of inflation that we saw last year. So as far as meeting the goal of being responsible, trying to accomplish our goals without having an undue impact, I think that that's a good indicator. Municipal services account for about 17% of the tax bill. And so then we'll go into a little bit more, and get just one click instead of two, more discussion about the mill rate, because that's one of the things that comes up a lot and people ask about commonly. And we have done what is called factoring over the past 3 years. We've had to increase our residential property values across the board for 3 years straight because the state of Maine has increased what they claim we have for value over the past 3 years. They're not wrong. The sales data and studies support that increase. But we're looking at a 15% increase this year because of that spike in the last couple of years with home values, just to keep pace with what the state says we're worth. And what that means, again, is that when the mill rate goes, when the valuation goes up, the mill rate goes down, because we don't want to collect any more money than we have to. So if we have a certain obligation and we have a certain mill rate, it's really just a factor. It's a numerator and denominator. And when the value increases, the mill rate decreases. So right now we're looking at a mill rate decrease. But it's not as clear as that. There's a bit more nuance to it. And it's not a direct one-to-one because the homestead exemption can be affected sometimes. But right now, we're looking at about a 15.83 mill rate. And after the factoring, we'll be probably closer to 14. And if the property value increases the way we expect it to, it could be 13.5. So we'll see a low mill rate, which, I mean, people might like to see that, but it doesn't really mean that costs are going down. As you can see, we just talked about the fact that we've got cost increases. So I just wanted to touch base on the mill rate, on the factor, and the fact that they're related and they don't always tell the truth. If you're looking at them individually, you have to look at them together.
Well, they tell the truth.
Well,
yeah.
It's
just math.
It's just math, yeah.
And it's also bringing the assessed values somewhat more closely in line with what people are getting for appraised values from realtors if they're selling and buying.
And from the assessors, because Carol and Steve and I are both on the assessors, from the assessors standpoint and working on the board of assessors and sort of watching that, the reason that we have to factor is because our valuation is so high that it's a way that it allows for us, like you said, to bring things more in line with where, according to the sales of homes and renovations of homes, the state of Maine has us here. But since we haven't had a revaluation in a while, that's why we have to factor. So I just want to make sure it's clear. The factoring and the valuation are indicators of a lot of good, positive things about the town. So I think that's pretty great.
And having a better value or a closer value to what the state says allows us to receive more state funding. Because if it drops too far down, then we lose state funding, which is a loss of revenue.
Right,
which we
parts
don't
of
wanna
the,
do.
yeah, right, we wouldn't get the full reimbursement for the homestead exemption if we fall below that.
Yeah.
But our growth has been so much that the state of Maine is letting us do that. Carol?
So bringing the mill rate conversation down to a household. If the assessed value is possibly going up 15%, tax bill to that household is going to go up.
No,
No?
No.
that's what the factor is. The tax bill is
Okay.
would stay the same.
If spending is the same, again, we have that little $42,000 little, it's not that little, but $42,000 increase, 4% impact from spending. But if spending stayed the same, which is the best way to look at it, if you increase by 10% the mill rate, or the valuation, the mill rate would go down by 10% to reach that same number that's being raised.
Okay.
Those are inversely proportional, right? That thing.
One up, one down.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah, and on the website, there's a chart that tracks mill rate and valuation, and you can see that, as Dennis said, they're inversely proportional.
Thank you.
So
Very nice.
I'll screen share again, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about what those impacts are for residents on a very direct basis. Just doesn't want to incorporate. Okay, so this chart, again, it's not showing on the screen, so you have to look at the one that says municipal property tax impact. Oh,
there.
all right, it's
Oh, we
these
got
things.
that fixed an hour ago.
Well, it's a little laggy sometimes, but that's, again, we're gonna fix that with better internet. So the average home is valued at $260,000 this year. That will increase, again, as I said, by about 15%, but we're just using this number because it's an easy baseline and it will accurately reflect the out-of-pocket changes. And so what you can see is that we estimate the municipal tax, again, this isn't the school, this isn't the county, this is what it costs for providing municipal services, roads, transfer station, beach, youth programming, all that stuff, administration, all that is $633 a month for an average home in Reedfield that is occupied by people who live here, right? We want to be clear about that. And so the annual difference is we're seeing about a $24 increase from last year, about 4%, which I talked about in that earlier slide. But if you look back to that middle column, estimated tax, the out-of-pocket impact is actually closer to 21 or 2020. So we did go down because of COVID, similar to what the school did, and we're going back up. But we're not that far off from where we had been in the past. And I want to show this next graph that shows that, real dollar out-of-pocket impacts. And I mentioned it with the school, which is the line at the top. It's a red dash. It shows that the school budget is getting up, just under, or just right about $4 million. And if you look at that trajectory, that's about where they were expected to be if we hadn't had COVID. The town, we've had a little bit different history, but we have gone down and we're kind of going back up again. And COVID was a big part of that in 2020, 21, and 2022. And then you look at, and so we're that middle line, that's blue dash, but smaller. And the black line at the bottom is the county. I envy the county. They have two departments. They've got the jails and they've got the sheriff's department. It makes it fairly easy, and all those are unionized. So they have a pretty good idea what their costs are. And so they're very stable in what they assess the towns. We actually lucked out this year. The county budget overall went up 5% for the county as a whole. But because other towns around us are increasing in value in the county at a little bit higher rate than we are, for whatever reason, they actually absorbed a bit more of that cost increase. So we only saw a 1% increase from the county, and so that looks nice and neat here. But this is the real out-of-pocket impact relative for those three contributors to the tax bill. And then this chart here shows the municipal percentage, the school percentage, and the county percentage as a portion of the tax bill, and then shows a further breakdown of that 17% for the town. Where does everything go? And you can see that, capital, that big wedge at the top, 3.6% or whatever of that 17, or of the overall expense is capital. So this is a breakdown just to show really graphically where things, where your dollar goes. I used to like that that chart that split the dollar bill and broke it into little pieces and says this is federal, this is state, this is local. We can't really do that, but this is a great way to give a similar impression.
Eric, I do have to correct you, I believe. The 3.2 is administration and capital is the 5.5.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, that's right. And there's some weird lines on the screen here.
It's because you can choose to mark it up on Zoom. Yeah, you drew on your screen.
I don't just talk with my hands, I talk with so anyway, I'm going to wrap this up quick because I got to figure out how to get rid of that. But school and county budget highlights, their information is available on the website, Maranacook.org budget. And they're expected about a 7 or 9% increase, and it's about 76% of the total taxes. County budget is as I said, 5%. Reedfield is only hit by 1% of that. And usually county tax accounts for 5% of what we spend. And so I guess I had any final budget questions or comments, and I'm going to stop screen sharing and take away whatever I did. All right.
All right. If anyone online would like to ask a question, you can certainly unmute. You can ask it in the chat as well. If anybody here in person would like to do that as well, you are more than welcome as well. Anybody on Zoom? All right. Seeing none. Any folks here with us want to step up to the podium?
We have 6 people on Zoom, by the way, who are not in the room, who are also on Zoom.
Well,
Hey, Bruce.
hi, I'm Bruce Burgoyne. I live on the Fog Road. I want to thank you and commend you for, I think, a very tight budget. I think you probably had a difficult challenge ahead of you this year. By my recollection, and just kind of looking over committees, there are about 100 people that have their hand somewhere in this process, if you look at the different departments and so forth. So I think, I've been getting flyers in the mail that say various things and characterize the budget in various ways. And I don't think this is an appropriate place to answer some of those particulars. But I do think it's a place to say, a good budget was built. You can agree, you can disagree with it. Let's do it in an honorable way and honor the people who built our budget and brought it before the voters, and the people who criticize it in the case of not agreeing with fiscal policies or a particular item on the budget or whatever. I think that's very good as well. And I'm just, for myself at least, and whoever might listen to me, I'm urging passage of every single article.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So if not, Dennis, we do have some discussion about the special items, or not special, but noteworthy to some extent items on the warrant. And the
Go right
first
ahead.
of those would be the proposed fairgrounds project. And I have a slide on this, but I really hope that Steve or maybe Greg could speak to it a little bit. But I'll just go off of this and not screen share. I think it's probably the time where we want to talk to each other and look at people's faces, not PowerPoint. The proposed fairgrounds project is a collaborative, multi-level process, and it didn't start off that way. A year ago, I think that we had some challenges talking about this as a community, but I think that we made great strides in engaging people more actively and more constructively. So I wanted to make that point. I think that it is responsive to the prior vote that we had, and where this project wasn't successful, and public comment that's come through since then. I think that we have a proposal for a phased project with no tax funding for the construction, and grants and donations are what that article calls for to move this project forward, and voter approval only after a final plan comes together. And it does include a multi-use field and parking improvements. There are other things that are being discussed and considered, including a basketball court, but that's not in the first phase. But I guess from my perspective, having been involved with this peripherally, actively at first, but peripherally since, I think that's okay. I think that it's good that we're having a discussion about what to do up there and how to do it, and the fact that we have it proposed as a phased project. That doesn't really bother me because I know that we've got good people working on it and we have a lot of interest from the public, and nothing's going to get slid through. So I hope people consider that when they talk about this project. And then the article really does just ask voters for pursuing funding and support for planning with any final proposal needing voter approval. So that's my piece on it. And then I'll ask Greg or Steve to talk. Yeah.
Greg Durgan still, and on the Fairgrounds Committee workshop group. In today's, June's messenger, the rec department under the signatures, which I love when there are signatures, you know that. Hannah Flannery and Greg Lineback have put together a very half-page summary, I think is the best term to use, asking people to support that project and what it means for a yes vote this year in June, the work that will continue if that's passed, and another presentation, more detailed in November at the election. So I want to thank Greg and Hannah for putting that out there. I encourage everybody to read that. It's not very long, half a page. Do it during a commercial from TV or whatever. And as I can politic, and I guess I can because I'm here, I really encourage passage of that warrant article. And thank you, Steve, Sean, Eric, and the rest of the committee that have worked on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, do you want to explain anymore?
Yeah, Steve, you have any?
I think maybe just one other thing to highlight, and you've talked about it a little bit, Eric, but the key piece of this for me is that we had a really, really productive series of meetings with folks from all the town committees, and that involved a whole bunch of folks, not on the select board, that really moved the process forward and got us started on coming up with a plan that I think has great promise for continued improvement. And then we had a really, really good public meeting a couple of weeks ago with a lot of interest. That was awesome. And I think what everybody in the town should hear really, really clearly is that this vote does not say we're approving any particular plan. It just says we like the direction we're heading in. We know there's more work to be done. We'll involve tons of people again. You know, the intent is to continue involving everybody. I think that was the biggest kind of goal we had as we got started on this, is just get people involved. And I think it's been really successful in doing that, and we want to continue that. So the only way to continue that is to speak positively and at the ballot box.
Absolutely. Greg, welcome back.
Last time, I promised. I was remiss. I forgot. I mentioned Steve and Sean and Eric's bringing people together. Dennis, I forgot you, and not on purpose. I would say
It's all right.
that you and I probably were polar opposites a year ago on this project. We sat down, not that we're anything except willing to work together.
Amen.
And that's what this town's about. And it's a credit to that committee that they allowed us to continue and come to an agreement.
That's it. That's it. And look at us now.
And look
Look at us now. Who would have thought? Thank you, Greg. Anyone else about the fairgrounds? Anyone online? Go right ahead, Carol.
Sorry.
Sure. Don't be apologized.
I would like to encourage people to vote yes for the project, because I believe then we can start grants to help pay for it and have the plan move forward. I know there are people that want to vote it down because there is no basketball. We had a very passionate, packed meeting in support of that. I still am asking if some members of the public can be involved in the committee going forward. I think I was told, and there's too many on the committee, but I think again, we're waiting to hear from the public when something is complete and we've hired professionals for a project, and then we hear from the public whose wishes are maybe in a different direction. And I'm not so sure it's going to bode very well for November. We're just asking for a tiny piece right next to the softball field for kids to go play safely and get them out of their electronics and get them out of their bedrooms and get them off of TikTok and go have some exercise. And that's something I think that would be used more than anything else there. Softball takes a team. Basketball can be one person or a dad and a son, whatever. I think that's going to be the most use. Going to look at a garden, occasional. I'm just saying the people spoke very passionately, and that has to be taken into consideration. So I'm just asking for some input going forward to open up that committee to people that are on no other committee.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, and to build on what Carol was saying, the importance of this vote is that this gives us the opportunity to continue the conversation. There is no plan that is approved right now. There's a suggestion of things that people so far have agreed on, and they may agree on more. They may disagree on more. We don't know, but we won't know that unless we move forward. And moving forward means that we're asking for no local taxpayer money. And once that whole process gels together, then a plan will be developed. And that's the plan that would come out in November. It would have funding sources attached to it, correct, Eric? That's the idea?
Yeah, that's the idea, yeah.
Right, so we would have a plan, we would have the funding, and then that's the time that the voters would say, yes, we like the plan, we like the funding, no, we don't like the plan, we don't like the funding. And in the meantime, as Carol said, we want to get as many people involved as we can. So you've got to have an organized way, and then you've got to have a hearing way to hear from all the others. And so I support just what you said, Carol.
No.
I'd like to add one or two things. That one is that several people have referenced November, and one of the things we said in the committee is that we will bring it to a public vote when it's ready.
And if
Right.
that's November.
If it's
so be it.
November, so be it. If it's not, then we'll keep going. I mean, like, the idea here is to involve people, everybody, and do it right. That's the goal.
Excellent. Thank you. Anything else for the fairgrounds, or we'll move on to our next special?
Okay, so the next item would be the proposed land use ordinance revisions, and that's one of the last articles. These are all articles that are, the fairgrounds is a little bit earlier on, article maybe somewhere between 10 and 15, I can't remember exactly, but the rest of these are all at the end of the warrant. But we have some proposed changes to the land use ordinance, and I'll just give a quick summary, and then I'll ask Paula Clark to maybe make a couple statements about what she sees as happening. But the changes are basically there to primarily clarify current LUO language. One of the banes that we sometimes have with policy is a lack of clarity. And I'm not sure that's something that is terribly pressing right now, but we have a few things that we want to improve on. One is the definition of non-conforming structures, and Article 3, Section 4 is the piece that addresses. We also are looking at allowing electronic submissions in lieu of paper submissions, Article 6, Section 3, and that's pretty, I think, direct, just trying to make the process easier for applicants and for the planning board. And then we have a change that deals with screening for non-agricultural, commercial, industrial, and industrial storage warehouses, and that's Article 8, Section 16. I think that's a consistency one. And then limits on the number of docks, so that people can't have like 5 docks in front of their summer house. That's consistent, making us consistent with state law. And that's Article 8, Section 19E. So that's a quick summary. That's in there just for reference. And then Paula, if you want to add some clarification to that, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. Good evening. I'm Paula Clark. I chair the planning board. The planning board had put together a package of proposed land use ordinance revisions. We held a public hearing in March on those revisions. Very few comments submitted. We did get some participation from the select board, which we appreciated. And however, they are pretty much, as Eric described, probably the biggest piece has to do with non-conforming uses and structures. That section in general is complicated, and it's proved to be confusing, not only to people who are trying to put in applications under that section, but on occasion to the planning board as well. It's just, it was not put together well, and it is confusing. So the biggest piece, I think, is reorganizing that section, trying to make it more user-friendly and more clear with regard to what the standards actually are. There is some additional language that was incorporated into that section as well. There are no radical policy changes here at all, despite some written material that you may have seen circulating recently. There is not a policy change with respect to that section. It is for clarity and ease of use only. The other thing it does is more clearly deals with the intersection between municipal rules and state rules. Because as most of you know, we are required to comply with the state land use rules and statutes and to incorporate them into our ordinance in a way that's consistent and at least as stringent as state law. So to the extent where you might see a little bit of new language in that section, it's principally to address that and to make that relationship more clear. I think I would just urge passage of the article with the changes. We do feel that collectively they represent a step in the right direction to clarify, to make things more consistent and easier to address with regard to the ordinance. If there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Go ahead, Carol.
Sorry, Paula. So it's like the verbiage says, we have 4 important changes for the voters to consider, and for more information, it gives like the whole Reedfield Maine website. So if someone did want to read the important changes, it might be helpful if it says, go to planning committee. And so how would I find this? If you go to the planning committee, is there something that says these specifically?
It's actually a piece, I forget exactly how the website is laid out, but it's under the town meeting, 2023 town meeting and the warrant articles. And there is a piece specifically on the land use revisions. There is both a summary, a general summary, and then there's the detail. And the detail is, it shows exactly where it appears in the ordinance and what the language is.
So that's something you can just click on.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Both of those things are in the on the town website. The only caution is that what it does, the detail includes the entire land use ordinance. And there are only 4 locations in the ordinance where changes are being proposed. So it really is there are 4 things, and you kind of have to scroll through the ordinance to find the locations.
Just for clarity, because I just did it, if you go to the Reedfield website, right on the front, there's a giant button that says voting, and you click right on that, and it'll take you to the June 13th, 2023 town meeting. Again, it's right on the front page. It's a big button that says voting, and then you can click on the June 13th, 2023 meeting. In that, when you do that, it gets a copy of the land use ordinance revisions are separated. The beach ordinance is a part of that, as well as the comprehensive plan update.
But we won't see those 4 items unless we scroll through the land use ordinance?
The summary lists
Okay.
4 items.
Okay, great.
And it describes what they do. And then the ordinance itself, there is underline strikeout, and it's an underline strikeout version that includes the new or the modified language.
Yeah. And there's a button right there that says summary, and the 4 pieces are there, Article 3, 6, 8, and 8.
Thank you.
So, yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. We can move to our next special if...
Sure. So
All
this
right.
one is exciting. It's a proposed beach ordinance. And I like this because it helps us kind of settle down a little bit after we've had a few years of transition from a beach that was, used to be privately held, then was basically a club with limited membership, then became a town responsibility, but was fee-based so that individual users had to buy a pass, and then recently converted to a use model where it's similar to the transfer station in that basic use of the beach is free or at no cost through the pass system. People pay for it through taxes, but that everybody has access to the beach. And then some things cost money, like renting it, stuff like that. But the ordinance helps establish some of the parameters and protocol, and it's really an administrative ordinance. But I'm just going to read the purpose of that ordinance, which is to provide for the enjoyment, health, welfare, and safety of all persons using the town beach, to provide a means of maintenance, operation, and protection of the town beach, and to provide a family-oriented atmosphere for lawful users of the town beach. The town of Reedfield is further committed to maintaining accepted environmental standards to preserve the ecological quality of the town beach and the waterways for future generations. So it really is kind of a round statement, but it prioritizes the importance of family, maintaining the ecological value, and making sure that people can use the beach without encumbrances of nuisance activity and things like that. So the select board had reviewed this and gone through it. We've had input from the rec board, and I think it's an improvement over the current situation, which is a loose set of rules that's hard to implement and enforce. So that's what I had. I'm open to any other comments on it.
I think it's good. I think as the beach evolves, the governance of the beach also should evolve. So thank you very much. Go ahead, Catherine.
We purposefully did not include lists of rules and costs and permitted uses, such as renting it for a family activity or a birthday party or something of that nature, because this was meant to be the governance document that allows us to establish rules and procedures and rental fees and forms to use the beach or to have kayak racks and rentals and so on and so forth. So those things are more on a policy level that can be changed and altered as the beach evolves and as citizens bring concerns and questions and ideas about how they want it to change or not change. And those are the things that will not be done by this ordinance. This ordinance is meant to just govern the overall structure of the beach. Did I get that right?
Nailed it.
Great. Go ahead, Aaron.
So the next item will be the proposed comprehensive plan update. And Jess, do you want to start with that? And I'll fill in if I need to. Sure. I talk way too much tonight, so.
No, Eric, just.
Hi, Jessica Gorton. I live on the Plains Road. And I am the chair of the Comprehensive Plan Update Committee. And we have been working for the last 3 years on this plan, getting data from the state, from the census, from the town, from citizens in the town, pulling that all together to create this giant document that takes stock of where we are and where we might want to think about going in the future together. It's non-binding, so it does not create any mandates or laws. It is a guide for the select board and committees to use moving forward, to refer to as they decide what are the kind of investments we want to make in our town in the future. We update this plan every 10 to 12 years. We are a little late because of COVID. So the last update was in 2009. This will be 2023, hopefully. And this is the second update since it started in 99, thank you. I don't have that on my notes. There's a lot of information, including the full document on the Comprehensive Planning Committee page on the Reedfield Town page. So if you look under committees and boards, you can find the comp plan right on the page there. It went out to, one of the processes is once we have the plan in its final warrant, it goes out for the warrant and also to the state. So at this point, it's a finished plan. But for the last 3 years, we've been getting a lot of public involvement and stakeholder involvement from all the town committees to putting out a survey. We had over 235 survey responses from town residents telling us what they felt was important to include. Generally, it seems like people are pretty happy with Reedfield. They don't want things to change too much. They want to protect what they have. And focus areas of this plan include ensuring we have sufficient affordable housing, particularly accessible housing for people as they age, preserving natural and recreational resources, promoting livability for all our residents, and supporting small and primarily local businesses. I think that's all I have on my notes. Is there any questions about the plan?
Also, let me just open it up too in case anyone online, we're discussing the comprehensive plan update. I've also put it on there that if they didn't feel comfortable unmuting, that if they'd ask any questions in the chat. So far, no, but I just want to throw that back out there. Anyone here? Go ahead, Carol.
There was one thing that I came across. I'm getting closer to finishing it.
Yeah, good for you.
Every day a step closer.
Let me see if I can find it. I'm sorry. Page 239, Reedfield Select Board should consider, so I know it's been said it's a guide and it's not binding, whatnot. Page 239, Reedfield Select Board should consider an approach to implement and monitor the progress of the comprehensive plan. One option is creating and appointing an implementation committee that will work in coordination with the Select Board. That's pretty strong words saying we're going to form yet another committee to implement and monitor the progress. I thought that was pretty strong for something that's just a guide. And when you have the select board who are elected and 7 members of the planning board plus alternates that are always already going to be heavily involved. I
Sure.
found that
I think
interesting.
that's a standard for comprehensive plans, that often there are implementation committees that are created that help help sort of keep an eye on the comprehensive plan, make sure it's not just sitting on a bookshelf somewhere gathering dust. And like almost every recommendation in the plan, it says that the select board should consider it. So it is up to the select board whether that happens or not in the end.
And the comprehensive plan committee will be done
Yes.
presumably when this is, or however this is voted, right? Yeah. Okay.
I'd say they're actually already finished up, Dennis. They finished up with the last public hearing that they held on.
Yeah, this is my
the
last,
17th.
hopefully my last time standing up in front
Understood.
I mean, unless things change drastically, which they could,
Thank you.
they're
do
pretty
other
much
stuff
done with their
for
job, yeah.
And I did still think it could be easier to find. You have to go to comprehensive committee, and then you have to go to comprehensive plan updates. And then there's a very long list of each chapter. And then way down there is final comprehensive plan. Can it be on the homepage of the town? Like one of the first 2 or 3 things, not that anybody,
Yeah.
is
Dennis
gonna.
just mentioned that it's right under voting.
Is it as well? I was going to
It
say
is.
it might be as
The whole
well,
The whole thing, yep.
because it's part of the warrant, so, right, so the link to that.
Okay,
So you,
Right
yeah,
there
if
listed.
you'll have it there, it indicates what article number it is. You click on that and you get every little piece that you would
whole
want. That's it.
okay. And then there was one other strong thing that I found interesting. Mandate that all subdivisions in rural areas be clustered developments or conservation subdivisions with at least 50% of the subdivided land in the rural residential district and 75% of the subdivided land in the rural district is permanently deed restricted against further development. That's really controlling over what people's land's going to be used for, I guess, is people's
Yeah,
personal land or farmland that's not being farmed. Those are very strong words, permanently deed restricted against further development.
That's in a very specific kind of property. What is the language again? It's in which district?
Cluster developments, conservation subdivisions, or at least 50% of the subdivided land in rural residential district and 75% of the subdivided land in the rural residential district is permanently deeded. I don't know, I get lost in the wording, but the
My planning board
Permanent
expert
Yes.
has a comment on it.
Paula, if you don't mind just introducing yourself again, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Paula Clark, I chair the planning board. I think that, I don't have it right in front of me, Carol, but I think the section that you're talking about was within a list of possible approaches to land use. It was not a specific recommendation that we do that. And the description that you're reading is about what cluster subdivisions are. Often they include some open space that is in conservation land and is dedicated for that purpose. So it's not a broad statement about making conservation land out of all of the properties in those districts that you mentioned. It's about cluster subdivisions specifically. And the land use ordinance has currently a set of standards with regard to cluster subdivisions. They've not really been used very much in Reedville, but they're there. And in part, it includes open space and putting some portion of the property in that type of subdivision into some kind of conservation easement.
Yeah.
So Paula, that would only be for a property owner who is asking to have what did you call it?
A cluster subdivision,
So if
correct.
they're applying for a clustered subdivision, these are the parameters that would be considered.
Correct.
It's not that we're considering this for all land in Reedfield.
Right. And then, there are certain benefits that may come with cluster subdivisions, and then,
Right.
But yes, that's correct. It's just under those circumstances.
So it's a willing thing that someone's doing with their land.
Yeah, so it's not proposed in the comprehensive plan that we moved that model for everything. That's not the case.
But that's like an example of a developer they're all over America, cluster subdivisions that are like starter homes or things that people, seniors can downsize. So cluster subdivisions, I don't think is anything unique, but it sounds like if a developer comes in and says, this giant tract of farmland that's not being farmed anymore, this would be a great spot for small family homes or whatever, that then they would have to follow those guidelines.
Yeah,
Right,
if
the land
in
use
fact,
ordinance.
what they're seeking is approval for a cluster subdivision. And I think, if I remember correctly, the list that you're looking at right there is a list of possible land use approaches that either encourage or discourage development in particular areas of town. They're theoretical, and I think that's the list you're reading from. And so, it's possible that, cluster subdivisions could either encourage development in a certain part of town or discourage it. That's listed there for that reason.
Thank you, Paula. Bruce has a question. I just want to recognize him.
I actually don't have a question, I just have a quick comment, and it's really for people who might be following online, because we're having this conversation and we're talking about cluster developments under existing rules of the land use ordinance. We're not talking about what the comprehensive plan does. That's a completely different thing. It's in a list of recommendations, as Paula said. So I don't want people thinking that the comprehensive plan changes that.
Thank you.
We have existing rules on cluster development.
Good point. Thank you, Bruce. Anything else from folks here? I'm just going to open it up to Zoom one more time, just to make sure everybody has a chance.
And while they're,
Yeah.
raising their hands, I just want to say if people are a little intimidated, and thank you, Carol, for working your way through the whole plan, but the meat of it really is the recommendation section at the end. That's where you're going to find a lot of, options for what we could do in the next 10 or 15 years. The 168 pages that come before that is a lot of data about where we are now, which is, whether we like it or not really up for debate. It is the data we got, and we put it there for posterity. So
Awesome.
if you want a little bit of an easier read, start at recommendations.
You got it. Dave, go ahead. You know the routine.
Dave Linton, just for the sake of everybody gauging in a little bit, how closely would you say the previous plan has been followed? So maybe the town would know what to expect from the current plan. You know what I'm saying?
So if I may, Dave, just to reiterate,
Yeah.
You're asking how the new plan maybe is different from the old plan?
No, not necessarily. Like,
What did we implement?
Right. Did we pretty well stay to that, implementing that last plan right to a T, or not even close, or so? And then we could assume what
Sure.
we do with the next plan, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Am I making?
I probably, absolutely. Jess, do you want to speak to this?
Maybe Eric would be better to answer this because he's got 10,000 foot view.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that it depends on the area. I think that we found that we were more successful at finding discussion. I mean, so for the fairgrounds project is an example of something that was kind of considered in the comprehensive plan, but so was the open space plan. So I think a lot of times the comprehensive plan asks us to try to think ahead and to do planning work. And I think that we've done a fair amount of that. But I mean, as far as, those of us that went through it and looked at it, I mean, I'd say we're 50, 60% of what's in there. But I think the most important part really is the fact that we thought about those things and tried to, run an exercise about, well, does this make sense? Is this something that is consistent with, for example, with this plan, trying to keep things generally the same? And I think that message that's coming through, and there's a few others, again, just talked about before, that were key: the housing, the supporting small businesses, that type of stuff. If we can keep an eye on those things when we're making decisions and having policy discussions, that's where the success comes in. That's where the real value, I think, comes from the plan. The specifics, I think those are all over the place. But I think it's the process that we did well at.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Catherine.
I know one of the things I've discussed with various people about the comp plan has been about development. And we have districts in town, residential, rural residential, et cetera, village. And within that, the land use ordinance specifies what can and can't be there. And then the comp plan made suggestions about, well, we should have more of this here and less of this over here. But it's not ruled by the districts. And so we basically have seen that people don't want to do that. So if somebody wants to sell off their farmland and build houses every 4 or 5 acres, even though the comp plan says we'd like to have a more centralized town, people have been building where they want. And we can't stop that. So even though that was an idea that we thought was good, there's no way to stop that because it's not, we just go by the regulations. And so we may have a desire to have more affordable housing, but if nobody comes in as a developer who wants to invest their money and effort in it, then we won't have that. And so it's like what Carol was talking about financially. It's a planning tool. So we can kind of lay out an idea of a path we should follow and how closely did we follow it. I think a lot of the short-term things, at least for the planning board and the select board, the short and midterm, it was laid out differently before, and I actually liked the other format much better. Because the way these recommendations are laid out, we need an implementation committee who's going to figure out who needs to do what when. Because that's like hundreds of pages of things we need to follow up on. I think a lot of those short and midterm goals were met. Or they were things that couldn't be met, like monitor Carlton Pond, so if it ever becomes available, we could purchase it. Well, it's never become available. So, like annually, we'll look at the plan and say, hey, did Carlton Pond come up for sale? No, okay, well, we tick that off. So some of it, yes, and some of it, no.
I know it's a tough thing to.
Right.
Just trying to get everybody to get a feel for what kind of impact it will make.
Exactly, and I think having a better implementation plan will help. We did have a spreadsheet we used for a number of years where we were ticking off things quarterly. And I'm not sure that it ever really followed through in the long run. And I think that would be useful, just so we could answer your question next time. That would be really good. Yeah.
Bruce, welcome.
Yeah, my name is Bruce Burgoyne. I live in the Fog Road. I would say on this plan that if you were to boil down to those 4 focus areas, those are really reflective of what I want to see in town. And I think a lot of people as well, and I'm assuming quite a bit of that feedback came through the survey. I did want to just kind of address the general discussion we just had, and that is that the comprehensive plan, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, is it's guidance, but not governance. They're 2 different things. And the reason I want to say that is there's been, again, information floating around town about a $500,000 bond resulting out of this comprehensive plan. This comprehensive plan does not raise funds. It doesn't propose to raise funds. That information is not genuine. I could characterize it further, but I won't. As you know, it is a falsehood. That's all I can say. So I urge people to take a look at the comprehensive plan on the basis of what they want the town to look to in the future as guidance, not governance, and make the decision on that basis, not somebody picking parts of it and saying, well, if you did this, if you did this, if you did this, it would be a $500,000 bond. We can probably do that with any of our dreams. Take care.
Thanks, Bruce. Anyone else? Anyone on Zoom? Go ahead, Carol.
Sorry.
Don't have to apologize.
On Catherine, just something she said and something we talked about at the last meeting. The villages, I know is a saying, concentrate development in the villages. Is the fairground considered part of the villages or not? I don't know.
Isn't that part of the school? I think that stretch might be the end of the village residential. I have to look at that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't remember where the lines are.
Okay, I thought somebody said it was, but I just wasn't sure. Secondly, isn't Carlton Pond already protected by something, anything?
It's owned by the Greater Augusta Utility District.
Okay,
So, and there are no, there's no protection on it. They could sell it off and make hundreds of millions of dollars probably
see.
on it if they did it to the right seller, and that's cool. But it's also just as I said, a huge untouched area in town that you have to go up to near Katahdin to find lakes like that in state of Maine right now, and we have one in Wheatfield. So.
and they don't use that for water anymore, right?
Nope, not. It's a backup,
Okay.
but I'm not sure they've ever really actively used it. So.
And Winthrop is on part of it, right? I mean, part of it
Yeah,
is
Winthrop
contiguous
owns
to
the
Winthrop.
south end, the south, shoreline, I guess, yeah.
In the outlet or in the tributary, I don't know which it is also in Winthrop.
And page 247 is a very cool chart. It's like blue and white, and it has capital planning summary 10-year horizon, and any expense over $10,000. It has every department, and it has a giant list of projects maybe to be considered in the next 10 years. But there's a priority column if it's a low priority, medium priority, high priority. Where does that low, medium, high come from? Does anybody know? I think this is a great chart, like when we start
Yeah.
talking about capital
That's-
planning.
She's looking at our CIP from this year that you included, Eric, into the plan.
Yeah, so I think it either comes from one of two places. I'd have to look directly, but either from the capital investment plan, which does establish some prioritization, or it could be from the committee discussion around what some of those projects might be as far as priorities. But again, that's just a starting point, and I think that some of those are probably spot on, some of them are probably less so. But the important thing is that we have it there and we can talk about it. And that's, I guess, my last point about the comp plan is that it does contradict itself in places. We have things that don't align. We have community values that are at odds. People don't really want to see lots of high density housing. They don't want to see smaller lot sizes, but they also want to see affordable housing for elderly and for low income families. And two of the best ways to bring in that type of housing is to have smaller lot sizes and high density housing like apartments and things. So there's a lot of that contradiction, but that's okay because that's what this is about. It's about that discussion. So if it was all one message and all one voice, I would say something's wrong here. So I'm actually glad to see a little bit of that, but it means that we have, with housing being one of the top priorities, we have a lot of work to do as a community to figure out how we're going to try to help our kids stay here and help people that want to work here be able to live here. So that's really what it's about for me anyway.
Excellent. All right. Anything else? I'd turn it back over to you, Eric, if you have any last thoughts, but otherwise we might.
Town meeting votes June 13th.
Town meeting vote is June 13th at the Kent Hill
Absentee
School.
ballots are available.
Sorry, Bruce, one last thing.
Yeah, I'm not trying to have the last word or anything. And I just want to point out as we pay our taxes that there are various levels of assistance for paying your taxes too that we sometimes omit or don't talk about in the discussion. You do have the homestead exemption that comes from the state. I filled out paperwork to freeze my taxes as a senior because I'm getting older. I don't know if the legislature is going to continue that program or fully fund it or whatever. That's kind of an unknown, but we have a couple legislators that do listen to us, so you can always give them feedback. And there is a municipal tax assistance fund, I believe, that's still in
Yes.
place. Is that
Absolutely.
correct?
Yep.
So all is not lost. It sounds like my taxes aren't going to go up very much at all this year, and I appreciate that. But there are also these other resources, and you can always call Town Hall, as far as I can remember, to get information like that.
You remember well, you still can. I just want to say thank you to everyone on Zoom, and thank you to everyone here tonight. If there's nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.